We're glad you're here, and we're about to begin. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. KenCast After Dark. Stimulating conversations all night long. And here's your host, Ken Cole.
Hello, everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful evening tonight. Thanks for joining us for KenCast After Dark. It's wonderful to see you. Today, we have a very interesting discussion. As you know, we do a lot of movie, TV show discussions, entertainment, pop culture. However, with the strikes going on right now, we're going to take this opportunity to talk about some other things, some other interests we might have. And because of the news lately, we have congressional testimony that UFOs and aliens might exist and might be here. We thought we'd take some time to think about this because as we love movies and we love science fiction and all these things, could this be real? And for this discussion, we're pleased to have you. And I've also invited another very special guest to help us sort all this information out. You've seen him before. He's the co-host of the Last Row podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Drew Rohaly. Drew, it's great to see you.
I'm happy to be here again, as always on the KenCast. What an honor, especially for tonight's topic. I'm really excited. It's really after dark today.
It is very after dark. It's the perfect after dark conversation, I think, as we look up at the night sky and wonder what's out there. So if those of you who are listening or watching right now, if you feel the urge to go just look out that window and look at the nighttime sky and wonder what's out there, we're right there with you. So Drew, I want to talk about your podcast to let everyone know you do a movie themed podcast called the Last Row podcast. And so tell us a little bit about that. And before we launch into this alien discussion.
Sure. Yeah. I co-host a bi-weekly podcast. We put a new episode out every other Thursday. In fact, we just put out our most recent episode on Speed 2 Cruise Control. I would like to say that it was a good movie, but I would be lying if I said so. But, hey, there's a critique there. But we have a lot of fun with the world of the movies, and we're in the middle of our summer of sequels. So we're doing all sequels to a bunch of movies that we've done. We have a couple more coming up, Child's Play 2 and RoboCop 2 over the next couple weeks here.
Oh.
But yeah, thanks for letting me plug that. Check us out, thelastrow.podcast.com, or subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, and let us know what you think.
It is a great it's a great podcast. Everyone go check out the Last Row podcast. And if you're so inspired, leave them a 5-star review because They deserve it.
Yes. Thank you.
So Drew, before we get going today, I want to say hello to everyone in the live chat. If you're watching now on YouTube or Facebook, you can go ahead and comment or post in the live chat, and we see your comments. We'll try to work in your comments into the conversation here. Terry Johnson, it's wonderful to see you.
Terry.
Hello, everyone. Had to get a new account. Oh no. That's password issues always happen, Terry, and we're glad that you're with us. Sebastian Santino, sorry. And Marianella, it's great to see you, Marianella. Thanks for joining us. Santino asked, Terry Silver versus aliens, who wins?
I gotta go with Terry's brains.
Oh, that, Drew, this idea and the fact that you brought that up and Santino brought this up, my goodness, I feel like this needs to happen. We need to see this.
I need the crossover.
We absolutely do. And so, guys, tonight we're going to be talking about something different. We're going to be talking about aliens and UFOs, things that typically have, been in the realm of science fiction and speculation about what our place in the universe is. But Drew, I don't know if you've heard this, but we have congressional testimony now under oath from highly trained, very reputable pilots and officers and intelligence officers that not only do UFOs exist, but that the government possesses them, and we might actually even have alien bodies. What do you think? How does that hit you?
I'll say that, it's finally becoming more, I don't want to say mainstream, but I guess now is where you're hearing more about it these days. And I think in the past, you'd always hear, oh, that's crazy, or that's nuts. What do you mean? And you would almost see people like demonized for talking about it. And, there's always been movies and TV shows and all kinds of stuff. And a lot of times they made him sort of cartoonish or silly. And I think now, with some of the news that's coming out, you're starting to really see well-respected people have testimony. I mean, and we'll talk more about the three folks that testified. It doesn't get more stellar than their records. And you start to think about it, it's like, whoa, these guys are decorated veterans, and it's not just some random guy. Like, I know I'm not supposed to talk about movies, but like Randy Quaid and Independence Day, that kind of thing.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
it's one of those kind of things where in the past that's what you would see, or you'd get the Ancient Aliens guy and people would joke about it. But hey man, it's starting to become a little bit more mainstream to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about it here with you. It's really exciting.
That's fantastic, Drew, and I want to thank you for joining us today. And okay, so everyone watching, you might be alien UFO fans or enthusiasts, you might not be. Drew, I thought it might be a good idea to give people an idea of our backgrounds and
Sure.
why we might offer a unique perspective on this. And I'll let you go first because I don't want to embarrass you, Drew, but I was interested to bring you into this discussion because you're very intelligent. You
Thank you.
are non-judgmental. You have an open mind, and you also have a very strong analytical background. And you've worked a lot in big organizations and are aware of bureaucracy and politics.
Yes.
So, with that tee up, tell us about what you bring to the topic and your own unique perspective on this.
I think, growing up, it's always a topic that interests me. Watching movies, TV shows, documentaries, all that kind of stuff. And, in a lot of ways, almost like this weird, in so many words, like a fear of it in a lot of ways growing up as a kid. You see some of the movies where they portray these things or these beings as like no big deal. Then some of them where they're truly evil. So I, grew up with an imagination like that, and sometimes that freaks you out when you're a kid. You get some nightmares when you're sleeping. But the older that I've gotten, the more open-minded I think I've become to a lot of things as well. You start to gain more life experiences. Like you said, I work in technology, so for me, like this type of stuff is very fascinating for me. That's my day job, so I have to analyze things, and for me, it's kind of it's an interesting topic to look at. And like I said, the older that you get, the more you start to think about, well, why is this news coming out now? What could it mean? Why didn't it come out earlier? Or did it and we just weren't paying attention? Is it real? Is there a reason for it to maybe be like people talk about psyops all the time? I don't know. But I'm like trying to approach this stuff with a very open mind, as you said, to see what it could be. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's something. I don't know.
Yeah, I love all those points you brought up, and I agree with you. When I was young, there were shows on television, one in particular called Sightings,
Oh,
that sort of talked about
I know that
different
one.
paranormal things. But they had alien stuff, like they had, supposed videos of aliens and stories of aliens and abductions and that kind of thing. And that freaked me out. Like, I agree with you. Like, that totally freaked me out. And I kind of fell off that. I really didn't buy into any of it, for most of my life. But then around 2015, I got back into it and I started looking at the work, particularly of Stan Friedman, who, rest in peace, was a big. He was a nuclear scientist who was a nuclear physicist who was into this and made it his life's work to study these phenomena from a nuts and bolts standpoint. And so I had the opportunity to talk with him on a couple of occasions. And it was really interesting because when I graduated high school, I went to college. I got a degree in meteorology, which is atmospheric science, atmospheric physics. And so I'm very much into like sciencey type things. And so I focused on Earth's atmosphere. And then I got my master's degree in mass communications and concentrated on filmmaking. So then I became a filmmaker and did documentaries and that type of thing. And then so I don't know. It's interesting to coming back to this because you have that there's a scientific thing. Is there some kind of phenomenon happening in our atmosphere or beyond? And then on top of that, you have the mass communication aspect. videos, are used as evidence. You have, all of these messages are being disseminated through mass media, which is changing in recent years. You have podcasts, you have what we're doing right now, Drew.
Yeah.
We're just talking about all this stuff. And so, so Drew, I want to be honest with you and everyone here. If I'm coming to this issue, I am looking, I enjoy speculating and looking at all the different possibilities. I think at the end of the day, I am looking at it from a scientific standpoint, or I'm trying to look at it from a scientific standpoint, and trying to sort through the noise. And I personally, I don't need there to be aliens. But then again, I am very open to aliens. I
Sure.
have no problem. Like if you, Drew, if you tell me that there are aliens here on Earth right now, and you ask me, is that possible? I'd say sure. I don't know why it wouldn't be.
Yeah,
The
why not?
universe is so big right now, right? I think at some point you just have to show me some proof, and that's I think why we're here. And so, do you have like a certain perspective on a belief, shall we say, on whether they're here or not?
Mine is similar to yours, right? Like I'm not sure that they are, but I'm not sure that they aren't. And I think until and I guess there's a way you could approach it with like what they might say is healthy skepticism, right? You can approach anything with a well, show me that there is. I think I've seen like Neil deGrasse Tyson and other, astrophysicists and astronomers and all of these other folks kind of approach it was like, well, there's no way. But I just feel like there's a lot of things that would make me think, "Well, why not?" And I'm like you, right? I don't need there to be them, but if there were, okay, that's interesting. Like, you said it, the universe is so massive to think that and we can't even comprehend how big it is. Like, I remember I mean, I had a astronomy class in college, and it's like one elective, right? But just even some of the stuff you learn in there, like just how huge the universe is. There's videos on YouTube that'll take you from, I don't know, a molecule all the way out to the edge of the universe and they zoom out. And it's fascinating. And to think about how huge it is and that there's nothing else, I don't see how there couldn't be, but I also don't see how there isn't. Like, I don't know. It's a really interesting thing to think about. And I go back and forth on it quite a bit. So and one other thing I'll say too is we always expect, and I think it's an interesting point, we always expect life to be like what we think it is because it's our perspective and our, it's how we relate to things. It's human quality, I guess. But when you think about, oh, there's bacteria that eats cyanide and all kinds of poisonous materials, well, what if there's other types of life out there that doesn't operate by the rules that we know of right now? What if we're just learning about new things? It's a fascinating way to look at it. So
I think that's an amazing point, Drew. And I love how you brought up the idea of microbes, because we didn't even realize that there were microbes until relatively recently in human history. All of these living things were around us and we had no clue they were here. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as we move into the future and as we explore this, that even right now, what is out there, what's around us right now that we're not aware of, but we might discover in the future. I don't know, just throwing that out there. I want to we have some really great comments. Terry Johnson says, of course, there are other beings out there, but for them to get to Earth, they would have to be very advanced or immortal, I guess. And then Marianella says, I live near a city where there's a UFO museum. Very interesting. Where there are testimonials from Argentine pilots, among other things. That is absolutely fascinating, Marianella. And that is something too that Drew, you and I could probably get into if we wanted to, or if you all want to at some point in the future, just how this is not something that's locally confined to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon. It's happening everywhere.
Yeah, one thing that I saw, and it kind of touches into Marianella's point, like I saw a lot of stuff that I look, read Reddit and other posts where people start to talk about their experiences, and I think we're all guilty in the United States of having sometimes like a United States centric view of things. But when you start reading about this, it's like, hey, look, other countries have been openly talking about this stuff for a really long time. And for whatever reason in the US, there's like this stigma of, oh, you're all crazy. And I think it might stem from like advanced technology and people wanting to sort of shield that or whatever. But Like I mean, I remember growing up just watching TV shows about Roswell and stuff like that, and the Area 51 type stuff, which is another, like, the video game, if anyone remembers that video game, the rail shooter Area 51. But the whole concept of that was super fascinating. I don't remember what show I saw, but there was a bunch of different episodes that talked about that Groom Lake and the secret flights there, and that stuff just fascinates the heck out of you, when you're trying to learn about these things, and the wealth of information on the internet now has really made a lot of that more accessible. You don't have to wait for, like, a cable television show to tell you about it, so
Oh yeah, it's an endless rabbit hole that you can jump into, and I've dipped my toe into that rabbit hole a number of times. But you're right, all of these stories inspire the imagination.
yeah.
I mean, the idea of Area 51 and like all of these things, and that's another thing I've noticed. I've been the past 8 years I've been kind of studying this, for my own personal interest, also for projects I'm developing, that type of thing. But the one thing I think we need to remember is that earthbound humans are excellent storytellers, and we build worlds. Like, Drew, we talk about movies all the time, and books, literature. Just people, especially very brilliant creative people, are very good at creating worlds, places we want to live, things that inspire our imagination. And so as we sift through a lot of the stories out there, it's good to keep in mind that it is possible that people can create great, inspiring things that aren't necessarily real,
Mhm.
but they're wonderful stories.
Sure. Yeah.
If that makes
It's a really good point.
Yeah. Ben, it's great to see
Hey,
you,
Ben.
Ben. No Mercy. Thanks for joining us. Johnny Utah says, if there's life out there, they would have contacted us by now. That's interesting. What if they have?
Yeah, maybe we don't know it, or
Right.
maybe we can't hear it. But I think it's a good point though, because people
Yes.
do bring that up, and it's a really good point. Like, maybe they would have.
Right. It's there are so many questions about this. Michio Kaku, who is a string theory physicist, um, if you ask him this question, he'll respond and say, or would they have? Or are they sufficiently more advanced than we are that it's like us walking down a path and seeing a squirrel on the side of the path? Do we feel like we have to go introduce ourselves to the squirrel? You know,
It's a good way
I
to
don't know.
put it.
Right. Uh, and Terry Johnson says maybe they're smart and staying away from us.
That could be true too.
Yeah, maybe that's a good point too. Clifford, thank you for being a channel member, Clifford. Hi, Ken and Drew. As a kid, I used Unsolved Mysteries to learn about possible alien spacecraft sightings, Area 51. Well, Drew, that was a huge series, that dealt with true crime and paranormal, but also they focused on these cases.
Yes. I love that, Clifford. And that might be the show I was thinking about when we were talking about Area 51. Man, just that theme song is, like, ingrained in my memory here, but that, yeah, and the way they presented it was sort of a creepy way, but Area 51, just as a concept, take extraterrestrials off and just maybe it's advanced technology or whatever, that whole concept of Area 51 and these, like, advanced research type places is so fascinating to me, and, like, what could have been happening. And I remember a lot of the TV shows, it wasn't just Unsolved Mysteries, but there was so many cool ones that speculated on that. But again, it was on cable TV, and, how much are they telling you? And I don't know. It really does get your imagination going, and it's such a cool thing to think about. So I that's awesome that you watched that as well.
Yeah, that's a great show. And so for decades we've had these stories, Drew, right? Like hints from government people and also these sightings by people and covered on shows like Unsolved Mysteries. And so I think we've kind of known culturally about UFOs for a long time. A lot of people laugh them off. However, in 2017, there were some videos that were released that were leaked from the Pentagon of unidentified craft taken by military personnel. And then in 2020, they were officially declassified. And you may have seen these videos, Drew. But one of these incidents was the famous Tic Tac incident. And don't worry, everyone, we're going to go through all these things. If you don't know what this is kind of interesting stuff, I think. And then also there's like the gimbal video and the go fast video. And so that happened. And then just recently, like maybe less than a month ago, about a month ago, there was a congressional hearing where two of those pilots testified in front of Congress. And then a new person who is an intelligence officer who specifically came across documents, he says, and testifies under oath that the United States has recovered UAP. So that's unidentified aerial phenomena. That's the same as UFO. It's a new term for UFO. So he says that we are in possession of these craft, that we have black projects, like basically super classified projects that sometimes even the president doesn't know about, where we're trying to reverse engineer the technology from these craft, and that supposedly he's seen documentation that we have bodies.
Biologics, so, I think that word really stood out to me. When they said biologics, I'm like, what?
What is that? So coming from your background, how does that news hit you?
I mean, it's when you talk about like bureaucracy, right? I think the first thing that I go to is and I think anyone with a logical brain will say, okay, well, where's the proof? Show me that. And they're really outside of the videos that you mentioned, right? The videos are some sort of proof. But when they start talking about, I think, you start thinking about David Grusch. I think that's the person that you had mentioned, right? Yes. I don't think, and I could be wrong on this, you have to tell me, but I don't think he actually saw anything himself. He talked to all the people that saw everything and saw all the like paperwork and all of the other things. Now, I could be wrong on that, right? But
I think you're right.
So then you start to wonder and you start to think about, okay, it makes a lot of sense. Like this person has a pretty decorated background. What's their motivation to make this information up? And you could go to political angles. I'm going to kind of avoid that for the sake of the conversation, right? Let's look at it objectively. Like, what is the motivation to make that up? Maybe they want to highlight like defense spending or something like that, right? Maybe they want to shift attention from things. Or maybe this guy really does think it's an issue, right? He wants this stuff to have oversight, and maybe it is a threat to, society. And, there's both angles. And it just, me personally, right? Like, I'm not going to say I'm a mentalist or anything, but I feel like I have a good knack on reading people, and just he seems genuine, right? Like he seems genuine. And again, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a whatever. I can't read officially, but it just doesn't seem like he had a lot of tendency to like lie. But I mean, I could be completely off base. This is just me as a human looking at another human talking. Same with the other guys. I think it was Graves and I'm going to forget the other guy's name.
Fravor,
right? Yeah. Fravor. Like they just, and I've seen people say this, right? They'll say, okay, even David Grusch, maybe he genuinely does believe what he's saying and he's just been fed this information. I think there's so many different angles to this that make it so fascinating. And the fact that there isn't evidence, that leaves it open. He's offered to give this stuff up in skiff rooms and stuff like that. There's rumors that he's been denied that and all that. So then you start wondering, well, what's the motivation there? I just find the whole thing so fascinating to me. And I don't know your take on it, but when you sent me the original, like, I think it was the original interview that he did on I forgot what the news channel was, News Nation, I think. I was like, wow, this is like, that was one of the first ones that I saw that said, all right, there might be something here. It didn't seem like a joke. It didn't seem fake. It didn't seem like it was politically motivated, at least to me, right, as I'm watching this. And it was just really, really fascinating. And I know you're into this too, but I'm coming into it like it's been a long time since I've really researched any of this stuff or really got sucked back into it. But I think this particular set of news and this particular, congressional hearing really piqued my interest again. And it's really got me fascinated by this stuff, kind of like I used to be a long time ago.
Yeah. I think for me, the big thing is that this is in front of Congress now. So all of those people, the three witnesses that you talked about, Fravor, Grusch, and Graves, were all under oath. And they're not just normal citizens. They've achieved quite a lot in the Defense Department, either as fighter pilots or intelligence officers. So these aren't just random people. These are people who have a lot of credibility, and they are under oath to Congress. And so to me, that makes me pay attention, a bit. And so I don't know, Drew. Should we jump into this? Should we
so.
look at some of this stuff and try to evaluate it? And before we do, let me bring up some comments. Johnny Utah says, "I wonder what the deal is with Mars. It should be inhabited. It's the right size and distance from the sun, yet it's devoid of life. Your thoughts?" I don't know, Drew. Do you have thoughts?
I'm trying to think of, I think I read a couple books back in the day where there was in science fiction books, and I used to read, books about space and stuff like that. And I remember, I can't remember the book that it was, and it's probably more lore, but there was people that speculated that life came from Mars to Earth, right? And it's been in a lot of stories, but maybe it was one of those things where the planet kind of died and Earth came here, or microbes came from there. I think, there's a lot of exploration of Mars now with rovers and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely interesting to think about that. And if they find certain things like water, etc., you never know what's out there, but it's a really fascinating thing. I mean, you're right though. It is the right size and distance from the sun. It would be cool if we can send humans there at some point. I know that that's obviously on the list of things to do. A lot of private space exploration is looking to do that. If they can make that trip, I think that would be a really cool human achievement to put people out on Mars and check it out with boots on the ground.
Right. Oh, 100%. It would be crazy to go to Mars. Can you imagine? My goodness. And to your question, Johnny, I think my understanding is one of the major reasons why life has trouble on Mars. Not only is it the atmosphere, the atmosphere has the wrong makeup for life as we know it. The magnetic field of Mars died sometime in the past. So basically, that means the amount of radiation that pours down to the surface of Mars makes life as we know it very, very difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah.
So, but I know there's a lot of speculation that in the past Mars may have been a lot like Earth. So,
did you ever read the? I don't know if you read the novels, and they made a TV show out of it. It was The Expanse.
I haven't seen that yet. I heard it's excellent.
It's based on a bunch of books, and the books are fantastic, and it's really cool because it takes a really interesting like angle on it, where it's like, okay, more realistic. Like if people were out there, right? There's people that grew up in like the asteroid belt and stuff like that, and it's a fascinating thing. And I just think about that a lot. It's like, what if people did colonize these places, and what would life really be like out there? So that's it's worth checking out as a book. I think I can say a book, right? I'm allowed to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a great recommendation.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to check out that whole story.
They're really good.
Absolutely. And Marianella says, "My dad told me the testimony of a girl who ran over an alien with her car. The alien got up and chased the girl, no matter how fast he was after her, until suddenly he was no longer there." That's wild.
That's
wow.
Terrifying. See, I remember watching, I forgot what show it was, but it was probably one of the ones you mentioned. And it's like you watch the abduction stories and things like that. And that's the stuff. Like I always joke with my co-host of my show, Badway. I'm like, I'll watch pretty much anything, but demonic possession, alien abductions, like those kind of things, just I don't know. They keep me up at night a little bit when I think about them.
Scary thoughts.
It is. Yeah.
And that's a whole other realm. Like there's so many stories about abductions and things like that as well. Drew Tube. Hey, Drew. The other Drew. A Cobra Kai kid, Drew, just joined. This is so cool that you're talking about this. I'm glad you enjoy it, Drew. And everyone, Drew Tube is his new channel that talks about all movies and TV shows. He's already lined up some great interviews. So everyone check out and subscribe to Drew Tube. Robana, channel member, thank you for being a channel member. Thank you for joining us. And Lockfear, remember me. It's great to have you here. And Marianella says, X-Files? Yeah, X-Files was a great show as well. That was a phenomenon, right? And that dealt with, at times, aliens and UFOs.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Drew. Here we go. So here's what I'm going to do. So those of you just for those of you who don't know these stories, I'll kind of set up these videos. The first video, the first clip we're going to see is a declassified government video of the Tic Tac. This is the Tic Tac incident. What happened was in 2004, there was this object that was being detected by our military off the coast of San Diego. And so Commander David Fravor had a squadron out there, and he basically scrambled jets to go see this thing. Apparently it had been out there, it had been sighted on our sensors for a week, but they wanted to lay eyes on this and see exactly what it was. So they go out to this thing and they look at it from really high up. They look down to the ocean, and it's this like little white thing that's over like this roiling water. Like the water was the sea, the ocean was just blue, except where this Tic Tac was. And it was like bubbling. It looked like it could have been a whale or something. And the Tic Tac was like bouncing back and forth like a ping pong. Okay. And so then they decide to dive down and go take a look at it. But as they go down, suddenly the Tic Tac breaks off and goes up, and it kind of mirrors their motion. And so they lay eyes on it, and it was like about a 30 to 40 foot wide Tic Tac, like the little candy, the breath mint. And so they saw it, and they were kind of trying to get in front of it, and then it basically just shot off in like a split second. And they're like, we lost visual on this. We don't know where it is. And then they got radioed in. They said, hey, guess what? It's back at your cap point. So that's like a predetermined point, where they conducted exercises. And so it was like instantly down, within 1 second, it was 60 miles away at the cap point. And then one of the other people just at the last minute got video of this Tic Tac object. So I'm going to play that video now, Drew, and then I want to get your thoughts on it. Okay, there's no audio with it. So you're looking through military cameras in 2004. Okay, and then that switched to infrared. So that's an infrared image of the Tic Tac.
So crazy.
It is crazy. Then people have gone in and kind of analyzed all the information on the screen. And then, okay, so we switch back to, this is visible. So you're seeing kind of, if I'm understanding correctly, you're seeing how the light, the sun has lit the top of it.
What time of day was this, did they say?
I don't know, except it was during the day.
It was during the day.
Yes. Okay, so they zoomed out. And then it basically shot out. So that was the Tic Tac. And so, Drew, I know that that's kind of, when we're kind of laymen and we're not used to seeing videos like that. And that's probably something very profound to someone who is used to that kind of imagery, to all that kind of stuff. And I know people have complained that it's grainy, but I don't know, what hits you when you watch that?
I think I wish I could understand the information that was on the screen. Like I'm not a pilot, so I don't know a lot about, the measurements and the things that were there on the military sensors and whatnot. But I think the interesting thing is, and it's not necessarily from the video, but it's the description that you gave. But then I think the thing about how it shoots off at the end, and
Right.
All the corresponding information about how it doesn't necessarily follow the rules of physics as we know them, especially being able to go supersonic in, I don't know, like a second, travel very far distances in a very short period of time, in a split second, and then also change of direction too, I think is the other one. But it's fascinating, right? And it's cool that they were able to get that because something was there. What it
Mhm.
was, I mean, like we said it before, like, well, why didn't they contact us? Maybe it's something we just don't really understand what it is, but something's there. They have proof of something. And when you get the testimony that goes along with it, it makes it even more fascinating because a lot of times you might hear a story of, yeah, I saw this thing. Okay, well,
Right.
the guy described what he saw, and then he had a video to back it up that sort of helped explain he wasn't seeing things. We may not
Right.
understand what it was, but something was literally there. And
Right.
it's really fascinating. And when they switched to infrared too, like there was like you could still see it, right? It's
Right.
again, I don't know the information from the sensors, but it's just really fascinating that that was captured and they went to see it live. I get
Yes.
so fascinated by the fact that it was hovering over the ocean, like you said, with the
Right.
water and the way that that was. I'm so fascinated by these things appearing over water or near water and what that could mean too. And this one in particular is it just in the shape too, the tic tac. Like, what is
Mhm.
that? Why? Again, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's not an alien. Maybe it's some advanced aircraft that we have. Who the heck knows? But it's still fascinating.
Well, Drew, to answer your question, I think I might play some of the testimony
Yeah.
because Commander David Fravor, who was there during that incident that I just described and we just saw the Tic Tac for, was questioned under oath about this recently in front of Congress. So why don't we play some of this? Because I think it'll be very interesting to listen to a lawmaker try to question what was going on. So let's go ahead and play that.
Now, is it true that you saw, in your words, a 40-foot flying tic-tac shaped object?
That's correct. Or for some people that can't know what a Tic Tac is, it's a giant flying propane tank.
Fair enough. Did this object come up on radar or interfere with your radar or the USS Princeton?
The Princeton tracked it, the Nimitz tracked it, the E-2 tracked it. We never saw it on our radars. Our fire control radars never picked it up. The other airplane that took the video did get it on a radar. As soon as it tried to lock it jammed the radar, spit the lock, and he rapidly switched over to the targeting pod, which you can do in the F-18.
From what you saw that day and what you've seen on video, did you see any source of propulsion from the flying object, including on any potential thermal scans from your aircraft?
No, there's none. There's no IR plume coming out. And Chad, who took the video, went through all the EO, which is black and white TV, and the IR modes, and there's no visible signs of propulsion. It's just sitting in space at 20,000 feet.
In your career, have you ever seen a propulsion system that creates no thermal exhaust?
No.
Can you describe how the aircraft maneuvered?
Abruptly, very determinate. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was aware of our presence, and it had acceleration rates. I mean, it went from 0 to matching our speed in no time at all.
Now, if the fastest plane on Earth was trying to do these maneuvers that you saw, would it be capable of doing that?
No, not even close.
And just to confirm, this object had no wings, correct?
No wings.
Now, was the aircraft that you were flying, was it armed?
No, never felt threatened at all.
If the aircraft was armed, do you believe that your aircraft or any aircraft in possession of the United States could have shot the Tic Tac down?
I'd say no. Just on the performance, it would just left in a split second.
It looks like that we have a problem here that needs further investigation.
Yes.
In your belief, is this flying Tic Tac, I mean, is it capable of being the product of any other nation on the Earth?
No, like I said earlier, I think it defies current material science and the ability to develop that much propulsion. And I know there's been some physicists who have done calculations, which is beyond anything that we have.
Well, either the United States has an adversary here in this world that we don't know, or we really have some serious investigations to do. I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything else about the November 14th, 2004 incident that you think is important for this committee to know that you haven't been asked here today?
No, it's been said it's probably the most credible UFO sighting in history based on all the sensors that were tracking it, and then for us to get visual and to go against the naysayers that it's something on the screen or whatever. I mean, there's 4 sets of human eyeballs. We're all very credible. Of the 6 of us that were involved in the thing, including the video, every one of us is going to do 20 plus years in the military in very responsible positions. So I'd say the world needs to know that. It's not a joke.
What do you think, Drew? It's not a joke.
I mean, he's right? How many human eyes were on it, plus the sensors? And the thing that I think, and I think he said that in the beginning, right, where it jammed the radar, which is odd, right? But he also said he never, and I think he said that, right? I didn't feel threatened. Like he didn't feel like it was a threat, which is interesting because it makes you wonder, like, what was that? And was it observing? Was it playing with them? And I think about even just something is like, okay, let's say they try to attack it and they try to shoot it down or something, because that's what humans do, right? It would be this funny thing, but it's like if it could accelerate on a dime, like there's no way they could have hit that thing. So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Like, what was it? And I like that he said, we had all these eyes on it, we had all these sensors. It wasn't just something on the screen, and I think that that's really important. Like, and he's a credible person. It's not like some random, he's not like me talking about that, right? He's got military experience, 20 plus years, like very, very credible. It's very fascinating.
I know. And I think this particular case, the Tic Tac, is kind of a slam dunk for there's something going on.
Right.
Because he obviously is very familiar with all the most advanced military aviation technology. And he's saying that this is beyond our current understanding of physics, defies our current scientific understanding of how this works. No one could do it. We couldn't do it. To me, that there's something. I don't know what it is, but it seems like there's something here. And I think you're right, Drew. There's too much like proof as far as like hard data, records, eyewitnesses, highly credible, the most credible eyewitnesses you could ever have for something like this. It's really kind of stunning.
Yeah. I think, if you want to go non-extraterrestrial, right, you could say, like, I think you said black projects or black ops type stuff. Maybe there is technology that like they literally are not telling anybody about, and it is that well hidden. And I'm not saying that they're testing it on our own people or something. I don't know what testing. I don't even know what that means, right?
Right.
But it could be that it is human, and then just nobody knows about it. Like it certainly could be. I mean, it's probably unlikely, but that's also a possibility. It doesn't have to be extraterrestrial, I guess. But it would make more. Well, would it make more sense? I don't know. I'm not sure what it would be.
It's really interesting because they asked him, they kind of asked him some more questions about this. I have another short clip where another lawmaker asks him about this, about could it be something else? Here, let me bring it up.
Expert naval aviator, have you ever seen an object that looked and moved like the Tic Tac UAP?
No.
Did the Tic Tac UAP move in such a way that defied the laws of physics?
The way we understand them, yes.
Many dismiss UAP reports as classified weapons testing by our own government, but in your experience as a pilot, does our government typically test advanced weapon systems right next to multi-million-dollar jets without informing our pilots?
No, we have test ranges for that.
It took over 15 years for your encounter with the Tic Tac to be declassified. Do you feel there was a good reason to prevent lawmakers from having access to this footage?
No, I just think it was ignored when it happened, and it just sat somewhere in a file. Never got reported.
So that's interesting. It's like, it's weird because I'm with you, Drew. I feel like, is it possible that a human could be behind this? Because, and the reason I'm wondering that is because it seems, whatever this is, it seems to be aware of the military. It seems to be aware of these jets. maybe even observing what's going on and mimicking the movements. And why would something, it would almost point to something like us if it's sort of interested in us, um, especially if it's hanging around the military. So could it be human? And then it's like every time you kind of probe, it's like, sorry, but like this is like not, this is beyond. And it's interesting because the United States is like, they have the most advanced, most well-funded by far military in the world. Like we should have the most technology, right?
Yeah. I think two things stand out, and I agree with what you said. Where he said, like, it was classified for X amount of years and they ignored it. I find it hard to believe they ignored it. Like, they knew, like you can't see that and then just say, well, we're just not gonna look at that, I
Right.
that's the one thing, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but I think that's the one thing that I have a hard time with. It's like, how would that have just sat on a shelf somewhere? I just don't understand that part. And then the other thing to say, well, they wouldn't test it on people, not by any standard protocols for sure, right? Like,
Right.
and realistically, like, he's probably right, right? Like, and I don't
Yeah.
think he has any reason to lie about that. But if that type of stuff is being hidden from people and it's something that no one talks about, like, of course we're not going to know about it, and of course they wouldn't use it on like a standard testing range, like the most secretive of them. uh I don't know.
That's a really interesting point because that's David Grush's whole thing, right? When
Hmm.
he's talking about these super black
Yep.
projects that are completely off the books that involve contractors. They're not even necessarily
Yep.
all in control by the US military. It's contractors that are working on this stuff. Basically, what you're saying is there might not even be that kind of coordination
Yes,
because this might be a completely independent, private, off the books thing that doesn't have to adhere to test ranges.
because it may be the only way to hide it.
Mhm.
They're when you do stuff with taxpayer dollars, I mean, you've got to, and there's ways probably to play shell games and all that stuff. I mean, people do it with finances. When you look at these billionaires that have offshore accounts, like, imagine what a corporation could do if they knew what they were doing. Especially, and it doesn't mean that the assuming, right, that this is coordinated by the government, doesn't mean that the government isn't in on it too. They're just doing it with the corporations instead of on the books with, tax dollars and stuff like that. I mean, you've seen people launder money in the news with things. So that's also, and it might be another reason to also not share it with the military. So, maybe it is these private groups like a Lockheed or what. I mean, I don't know. I don't mean to sully companies out here, but those are the
Right.
names that come up, right? Like those type of skunk works. And, throughout history, they've used those companies to develop new technology, right? I mean, that's how we've
Mhm.
gotten a lot of the aircraft that we have. And I think when you read a lot of things too, a lot of the things that people speculate is a lot of those things are in possession actually by some of these private companies and not by the government, because they're using them to do that research, or that's the speculation, right? Who knows if that's true or not? But
Right.
it's a fascinating way to think about it.
Right. I think though you might have put your finger on what could be disturbing about this. We'll take aliens out
Mhm.
of it. And why it interests me is because if it is somehow humans and some kind of private corporation that's developing this stuff, they're completely circumventing
Yeah,
the US government. And they basically have technology that completely trounces anything we're aware of in the US government.
yeah.
And that's kind of scary if you think about it. Like, regardless if it's human or not human, someone is operating things that are well beyond our understanding or the understanding of our aviators.
I mean, when you just look at that video and you hear him talk about it, like you said it earlier, and I know I don't mean to rehash it, but like
Mhm.
something is going on, like
Right.
something. What that is, who the heck knows? But it's something. I mean, you can't see that and ignore it and say, "Oh, it was just in their head," or "Oh, no way, the sensors were going haywire." And that's what's so fascinating about that video in particular and his testimony. because typically you look at this stuff, and I even think back to like Unsolved Mysteries and all these shows that we were talking about earlier. You get these people, it's like, oh, that's just some guy on a farm in, rural United States, or that's just some person that saw an air balloon, a weather balloon, right? That's what they always used
Right.
to say. And
Yeah.
these are like military, extremely trained and accredited people that are seeing something that they can't explain. And they're
Right.
probably trained on some very, very advanced technologies. I mean, they definitely are. So for them to say, there's no way this fits with the technology we have, I mean, you got to take their word for it, right?
Right. I know it is so fascinating, and there's even more that we'll get to very shortly. I'll get to a couple comments here. Terry Johnson says, yeah, not everyone in the government knows what's going on completely. I know someone who used to be in the CIA, but he couldn't tell me about aliens, really. He didn't do physical type work, he said. Interesting. Very interesting. Paula, great to see you. Michi Kaku has commented that the way this behaves physically, he doesn't see how there can be anything biological inside it. He has speculated that it must be a drone of some sort. And that's something too. I don't remember if I've got a clip of this, but they did ask at one point, in your opinion, the motion and the acceleration that you observed, would it be possible for a human to withstand that? And the answer is no. Like, a human would be liquefied by those rates of acceleration.
I mean, assuming they're using the technology that we know of, right?
Right. Exactly. Right. Is there some kind of, I know in, say, like Star Trek, for example, they use the term like inertial dampeners, which would fix that. So like, have they developed a technology where the entities inside would be safe? Or is Michio Kaku right, where there isn't anything inside? It's completely either AI or remotely controlled or something like that.
It would make sense for it to be a drone, right? Because I mean, we use drones. Like, why do you need a pilot of some type of, living being or whatever, right? We fly drones all the time. I mean, people fly drones above our houses now with their GoPros in them. So it's like, I think that is very likely. Like, it doesn't have to be somebody in there. And I think that would then better explain some of the unexplainable physics and to the point. I mean, I think it's a great comment there. It's certainly a good way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paula. Thanks for the comment. Peter Vonasak, hello. How you doing, Peter? Thanks for joining us for our little excursion into the universe. Let's see. Johnny Utah says, what kind of practical applications could a flying Tic Tac have? I don't know. Well, I might have a clip for that, Johnny. Let me pull it up.
Fresh breath for all of the United States.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that Tic Tac will give you fresh everything inside and out, right? My goodness. Let's see what we've got. Okay, here we go. This is talking about the national security problem. So we're going to think about this from a military standpoint. This is the other pilot and Fravor, or maybe it's just Fravor answering this question. Here, I'll play this video.
And based off of each of your experiences and observations, do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes, and here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, and you could put that anywhere. If you had one, you captured one, you reverse engineered it, you got it to work, you're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave, and there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Okay. So that's from a national security standpoint. Drew, you talked about being scared of this stuff as a kid, but that's kind of a scary thought, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, think about, assume, right, you talk about like adversaries or whatever. If somebody did get that, I mean, that's an arms race right there. Like, I know Oppenheimer and whatnot, the historical, not the movie, but like when that was happening in history, like the race for the atomic weapon, right? That was a very big deal in the World War II history, timeline. And you think about something like this, I mean, it could really, if the wrong people, and who are the wrong people, I don't know, but it could really be a big deal. And let's say there is aliens, right, or something. If they want to wipe out humanity, seems pretty easy based on the capabilities that were shown there.
Right.
I mean, I do agree with that, and I think that's why it's interesting to talk about, and that's why I think it's cool to have that in congressional hearings. Like a lot of times, I don't know, I look at congressional hearings, I'm like, what are they going to do about this or something? But this is one where, okay, it's national security. Like nobody knows who these things are or what they're doing. Let's talk about it because we might want to look into that a little bit more. That's what I want them looking into, you know? It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Right. And to your point about the arms race, that's something that David Grusch, who we'll see in a little bit, is claiming, and he didn't say it under oath this time, but he did say in his interview that supposedly all of the major nations, or like Russia and China, these things, if they've crashed or they've retrieved them, that all of the superpowers also have that. So it's not, it hasn't just crashed in U.S. territory.
Mhm.
They've crashed or landed or been abandoned around the world, and that all of these superpowers are also working on trying to reverse engineer these craft. Which, I mean, it sounds like a sci-fi novel, but the thing is, like, if something like that were true, Drew, I think you're right. It's an arms race. Who could be the first to reverse engineer these things?
And who's to say that somebody hasn't already? That's the other thing, right? And you
Right.
would never know. And that's I think that's another thing I saw in the news, right? Where people or not in the news, but on the interwebs where people are saying, "Oh, it maybe already happened. We've done it, and we want people to know," you know. And it's like, "Oh, it's a
Right.
smoke screen and all this stuff." I mean, the whole thing is so fascinating, like all the angles of this, because I truly don't know what it is, and I don't even know what I think it is. I'm not
Right.
sure what I believe at this point. Like there's so many different facets of this that are so interesting to try to break down, and that's why this testimony was so it was so cool, the fact that it happened, and those 3 guys were there talking about this. They're, like we said before, very decorated, you know, individuals that don't really have a reason to make this stuff up.
Right. So what I would like to do is bring up the next video that was released by the government. This is the gimbal video. So we can watch 2 more videos that tie into the another witness at this congressional hearing. So we're going to watch the gimbal video. This happened off the East Coast of the United States, maybe around the Virginia area in 2015. And this involved Lieutenant Ryan Graves. So let me bring this up and let me. So this one, you can hear the pilots talk. We'll wait for the Tic Tac to go away. Thank you, Tic Tac, for your. There we go.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing! It's rotating. Nickel 6-1 Tango Logic, over. Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger, there's troubleshooting. Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly!
So cool. I actually like that you could hear the conversation too, because the reaction to that, it actually adds to the movements, because like you said, I'm not a pilot, so I don't know like when something's, especially looking through instruments, like is something crazy or not, right? Like as a musician, if I hear something that's like really fascinating in music, I'm like, whoa. But seeing the movements and then hearing their reaction to it really adds to, oh, okay, I guess that's something that's pretty serious there.
Yeah, 100%. And these things basically were happening daily, according to Ryan Graves. Like they were doing training, they were doing, these were kind of like test areas, and they were flying our military craft, and they were encountering these things every day. And his perspective is that there's the stigma about reporting. The powers that be don't want to hear about this. You're expected to keep quiet and not report these things, but those are flight safety issues, and they're having sometimes near collisions with these things, and it's not being addressed. And it's like, what are these things? We don't understand what they're doing, and they're a safety hazard, but we're not supposed to talk about them.
Yeah.
You
And
know, it's
I think the thing that you said there that really is so fascinating to me is, why would they not want them to talk about it?
right.
Like, what's the reason? Because it is a flight safety issue. Like,
Right.
if that thing collided with them, or hey, it's an adversary in our airspace. Like, let's say it
Right.
was somebody from another country that was adversarial. Oh, don't talk about it. Like, that's the first thing that you should talk about. So that's the thing that I can't comprehend. Like, why not talk about it? Like, it's weird.
Do you want to know something really scary
Please.
that Ryan Graves was talking about, Lieutenant Graves was talking about in his hearing, is that it's not just the military, it's also commercial pilots
Yep.
that are seeing this. Okay, commercial pilots would be the pilots that you and I use the services of when we're flying across the country. And they're seeing these things, according to Lieutenant Graves. And the FAA and everyone does not want the commercial pilots talking about it, and for fear of, they could lose their jobs as not credible. And so basically you have air hazards from these things we don't know what they are, that might have been around a plane you or I have been on. And these pilots aren't supposed to speak up and not talk about it and not report it. And they could basically impact our safety, like the safety of citizens, not just
Yeah.
military pilots.
Why do you think that like, what reason would there be to not talk about it outside of it being, hey, it's some secret black ops project that we can't talk about?
Well, I've heard the idea that basically if you have military, especially the pilots that we've heard from in this hearing are Navy pilots. You almost never hear from the Air Force at all. And supposedly the Air Force is really non-cooperative, even with like entities that are trying to do this. And, people say it could be because their job, their charge is to protect us from the air. And yet there are these things that they can't do that job. They don't know what they are. So if they don't know what they are, they're kind of, it compromises their whole mission. If they admit that they're there, that's an idea.
That's a good point.
But that's just an idea. It just seems like maybe the Air Force isn't really talking about this. Now, David Grusch, who's testifying here, he was from the Air Force and then went into intelligence. So that's the branch of military that he's in. But for that gimbal and go fast video, those were the two videos, that's what they're called. Ryan Graves was part of that. And I want to play now just so you can kind of see him talking about the things he saw, which are different from the Tic Tac. It's not exactly the same thing.
The objects that are being seen by commercial pilots are performing maneuvers that are unexplainable due to our current understanding of our technology and our capabilities as a country, and that applies for the military as well.
Mr. Fravor?
Yeah, I concur with that. We have nothing that can stop in midair and go the other direction, nor do we have anything that can, like in our situation, come down from space, hang out for 3 hours, and go back up.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Crazy, man.
I might bring up another video because that one was pretty quick. And then this is him talking about, they're not.
That these were not our aircraft?
Some of the behaviors that we saw in a working area, we would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's 0 airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's that. And I'll follow that up with just one more because he's asked like what they look like. So
Are there common characteristics to the UAPs that have been cited by different pilots? And can you describe what the convergence of descriptions is?
Certainly. We were primarily seeing dark gray or black cubes inside of a clear sphere.
I'm sorry, dark gray or black cubes?
Yes, inside of a clear sphere, where the apex or tips of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere. And that was primarily what was being reported when we were able to gain a visual tally of these objects. And that occurred over almost 8 years. And as far as I know, it's still occurring.
Would you want to see one of these, or would you rather not see one? I think I would want to.
yeah, I would definitely want to.
Yeah,
I would want to.
because it's like hearing it. It sounds so wild. Like I can visualize exactly what he's talking about. Like a cube inside of a sphere where the corners are touching, and it's like it sounds like a science fiction novel. I mean, it really does. But the fact that they've seen multiple sightings of these things, like I don't know, I go back and forth because it's like seeing it might really freak you out, but then it's like I just want to know. I want to see it.
Right. And that's the thing. You would think that with all of our current technology and imaging capabilities that we actually have documentation of what these things look like, especially if they've been cited for the past 8+ years. Someone must have taken video or pictures of this. Must have.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this hearing is about, is like there's this frustration of the classification levels. Why isn't this being released? Why aren't we being transparent? Even Drew, from a scientific curiosity standpoint, like you want to see it, like not just because, I know you have like a curiosity and wonder about the universe and our world and would be very interested to know about phenomena happening around us. Even from that purely investigative scientific standpoint, you would think that scientists should be brought into this. Like we should be able to investigate what this is.
I go back and forth on this too, where it's like people's like photos get leaked. It's like, oh, this person was committing a crime and that gets leaked. How is this not leaked? Like I get that the powers that be, and it may be the most secretive thing in the world possible, but it's just wild that none of that has leaked. And I think there was a part of the hearing, and I can't remember if it was Matt Gaetz or whatever, but he said that he saw a photo that he was made aware of, or he was brought to something, and it like shocked him. Like he couldn't believe what he saw. And like he seemed very genuinely concerned,
Right.
And whether it's real or not, it's odd, right? And everyone's like, you said it before, I think people don't understand like how big of a deal it is that these folks are all under oath. Like I know people lie all the time, but you can't be in a more like you better not lie situation here. They could go to jail like for a long time if they're lying. And I mean, they're putting their necks on the line to share this information, which is what makes it so compelling.
Right. And since these guys come from the military, as well, they're expected to have candor. Like when they're being interviewed about certain events, whenever they're giving the reports of what they're seeing, they're expected to do that with candor. And it's a big deal if they're not doing that. So it's like, you can tell that these guys, it's ingrained in them especially if they're under oath, if it's for the government, if they're serving their country, they're going to reply with candor about what they saw. And I think that's what makes this compelling,
Yeah, definitely. The whole thing is so fascinating to me. And I think a lot about the description of the Tic Tac versus this cube inside of a sphere. And then you wonder, okay, let's say it is extraterrestrials. Are there different types? And then, what are they from the same? Are they warring factions? Are they, like you have different, people on Earth that are from different countries and races and backgrounds and ethnicities and whatever. Could that be? Or could it be more advanced versions of whoever, right? Could it be humans from the future? Could it be interdimensional type stuff? Could it be mind control? Like who the heck knows? It's wild, but it's like clearly it's not it's not on a screen. It's not computer graphics. It's not some type of hallucination. There's multiple people seeing this. Something's going on. I just don't know what.
Right. I know but Drew, see, that part is what has me so interested
Me
right
too.
now, because there's a mystery, and I know a lot of people want the answer to the mystery, but I also savor the mystery.
I
Like
agree.
it's great not knowing what these are, but uh, it's like we're listening to highly credible people saying something's going on that we don't understand. The scientific part of me, that piques my interest. And it's like, we need more data. We need to go figure this out. It's some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. It could be, is it natural? Could it be human? Could it be non-human? I mean, it's worthy of investigation. And the other side of this that kind of frustrates me is that you have people in the scientific community who are kind of dragging their heels. Like, I'm so sorry, but the way science works and the way it's always worked is that there's something happening, some phenomenon in nature, in the universe, that you notice, and you start to notice a pattern, or you want to be able to explain it. And so then you start studying it. You want to try to systematically get data about this thing. And it seems like we have something that's observed, that's real, that we've documented. And yet it seems like a lot of scientists really are like, they're not picking up the ball and running with it. Like, let's go to work. Let's put this through some rigor. And I don't know why that's not being done.
I think part of that could be, it's similar to the commercial pilots, right? Where there's this stigma of, I can't be associated with that, because if I'm associated with that, then they're gonna think I'm not a credible scientist, or oh, then I'll be the crazy guy that thinks about UFOs. And I think if they came together more as a community and said, hey, look, there's something clearly of interest here. You know, you don't have to go extraterrestrial. It could be, like you said, it's a problem to figure out. It's like a math problem. Let's try to find the answer to the equation. Like, I think you're right. As a scientist, you would think, hey, I want to understand this, because you almost have a natural curiosity. And you said something earlier, and I resonated with it, where it's like savoring the mystery. Like, I don't know if you ever watch a good TV show or you read a book, and sometimes you just want to get to the end because you want to know what happens.
Right.
But then when you do that, sometimes you forget like the fun that you're having while it's sort of unraveling. I think when you look back, I mean, look back in history, probably 20, 30 years from now, even longer, right? Say 50 years from now, I think we'll probably look at this moment and it'll be like, okay, this is where it all kind of started, and this is where things started to really come together, because that testimony, whether it's a smokescreen, a psyop, or whatever, that's a historic thing that hasn't really happened before. The fact that these guys are talking about this under oath in front of elected officials, it just hasn't happened before. It's always been on a TV show like Unsolved Mysteries or some
Right.
random news channel that people say, oh, those are just, they're crazy. You know, these are real people talking about real things. It's very, very, very fascinating.
Yeah, it is just fascinating. I want to play one more video from Graves, who talks about an incident that I'd never heard of at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And I want to get your thoughts, Drew.
Can you please explain to me in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
Certainly. In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
There we go. And then I think she went on to ask, like, is there any official documentation? And they're like, yes, there was official government documentation of this. Big red square, big as a football field, Drew, hovering over Vandenberg Air Force Base, which nothing's supposed to be able to fly over an Air Force base.
Yeah. So, like, the first thing that comes to mind is tic tac, sphere and a square and a sphere, a square the size of a football field, or rectangle the size of the football field, red. Like, none of those things resemble any type of known technology for flying, right? You look at something that's going to fly, it's either going to be like a helicopter or a plane, maybe a hot air balloon or something, right? But like, none of those shapes make any type of aerospace sense, really, when you think about physics and flight mechanics. Like, that one also was interesting too, because he said that if you listen to Fravor, he said it was more observing. This was Graves was saying that it was making aggressive movements.
Yes.
So a different kind of shape doing different type of behavior above an Air Force base. And the fact that they're happening near military facilities, like, is really interesting, because I mean, for a variety of reasons, right? Are they scoping out behaviors? Are they intimidating? You know, are they part of the military? Are they adversaries? Like, I don't know. Is it anything? I mean, who knows? But it's just odd that it's like different shapes, different mechanics in all these different incidents. I mean, and I guess you could say like an F-18 looks very different than a helicopter. So when you think about whatever technology could be, I mean, they're different, mechanics. But I just thought it was really fascinating that there are these weird shapes that are not like anything that we use at all for flying. And I don't know if that stood out to you.
Yeah, you're right. That stood out to me. And also the fact that these seem to be very maybe simple geometric shapes. Like, for instance, if you look at our aircraft, for the most part, they're not very simple. Like, if you were to draw like an airplane or a helicopter, like it's complicated. It's not like, you could say it's symmetrical in certain ways, but it's not a simple geometric shape, where these tend to be that. And you wonder if there's like certain technology that needs these things to be very simple geometric shapes. I mean, probably the stealth bomber is maybe the closest. I mean, if you look at it, it's almost like a triangle, and it's very stunning to see, I think, for that reason, because it's very different than any of our other aircraft. And I don't know. It's a really good point.
Two things come to mind, and especially what you said about the stealth bomber. Don't let me forget, because what I want to say is, like, imagine the first time you saw like an SR-71, or like the first time you saw a stealth bomber. Like, you might have thought it was a UFO. It's like, holy crap, what the heck is that thing? Like, sometimes they have military flyovers at like sporting events and stuff like that, and like you see the stealth bomber, and it's like it is very awe-inspiring when you see something like that. I mean, the noise, the sound, and just sort of like just the shock that you have of seeing something like that. But something that I thought about as you were talking about this, and I was thinking about the physics of some of this stuff. Take like, and this is where you start to wonder, like, is it of Earth? Is it of somewhere else? Take a B-2 stealth bomber. Can that thing fly in the atmosphere on Jupiter? Probably not, right? Because the makeup of the environment is very different, like a spacecraft, right? Like, I know that if you try to land on the moon, it's very different than probably landing somewhere else. And then to be able to do the maneuvers that it's saying within a different environment, like literally a different environment, it's a different planet. Like, if it was not of Earth, the technology would need to be so advanced, or they would need to understand the makeup of the Earth and the atmosphere, or have some type of strong understanding of the laws of physics across the universe to really be able to do that. And it's something I never really thought about before, because we just kind of assume, oh, it flies here, it can go fly there. Like, where is it coming from? and maybe it is originating here, or maybe it's just so advanced. Like at the end of the day, I feel like the universe, and this is going to be an oversimplification, but in a lot of ways, like all the laws are really just math. Like it's mathematics in a lot of ways, right? You look at different equations and things. I mean, it's ways that we as humans sort of understand things and how they work. We use numbers. And I just wonder a lot about that. And it's something that really fascinates me, thinking about these operating in other environments.
You know, you talk about operating in other environments, and you also mentioned the fact that the universe is very large and that forms of life, you know, we tend to look at things from our own perspective and see things in a very human-centric standpoint. And, you know, one thing I've thought about before is that if it's not from Earth, then what would life look like elsewhere? And I'm not just talking about like appearance. I'm talking about the scale, how big it is. Like, obviously, we have life of all different sizes here on Earth, but especially if you have life coming from different planets, different evolution, what's the likelihood that that form of life is going to be our size? Like 5 to 6 feet tall, generally?
Yeah.
Like, what's that likelihood? Because another thing I've noticed is that these craft that we see tend to be on our size scale. They tend to be in scale with us. Like, you know, you're talking about like this Tic Tac that's 30 to 40 feet long. That's about the size of our own aircraft. And, you know, we're seeing, you know, these objects that seem to be about our size. So, you know, what's the likelihood that things coming from other planets and other parts of the galaxy are going to be our size?
Yeah, I think that's a super fascinating thing to think about because, like, I was talking about the Expanse earlier. One of the things that they talk about in that book is like the people that grew up. They call them the Belters. So the people that grow up in the asteroid belt, like the gravity is less out there, so they're taller and thinner and have very elongated features. But you're right. Like, what if something was more on the scale of like an ant, or what if something was more on the scale of like, I don't know, think about comic books like Galactus or something like the World Eater and stuff like that. And you're right. Like, and that's where I come back to, we as humans, we try to understand things in a way that makes sense to us. So we try to put human qualities on things. We try to make, you know, why do they even have two eyes, right? Why does a traditional alien have two eyes? And what you see, right? The grays or all of that. Why do they look generally humanoid? Like, what's to say something would have bipedal, like, you know, two legs and two arms? I mean, what's to say it's not even invisible? Like, you know, for us, like, you know, think about what a dog sees compared to what a human sees, like the spectrum that people see. Could they be invisible to us and maybe something more infrared? Could it be more energy based? Like, I mean, I'm totally off the rails here, but you raised a really good point. Like, what's to say that they're the way that we think they are? And I don't know. It's such a fascinating, like, this is such a interesting topic.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think it's something worth considering because you're right. Our assumptions maybe can sometimes get in the way of what might be possible and what's out there. But, you know, Drew, there was another guy testifying, the man who has all the answers, apparently, David Grusch, who says, well, you know what solves that problem is the fact that, guess what? We just have all this stuff.
We got him.
We know it because we've seen it. And so let me go ahead and play Grusch. He's basically saying here that the government has possession. I want to be very clear. He's saying that our government has possession of UFOs.
Wow.
First, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Okay. So Grusch, obviously, you can kind of tell comes from a different background than the two pilots that we've seen. You know, he comes from He was in the Air Force, and then he was in the Pentagon. Apparently, it was very high level intelligence. You know, he worked as intelligence. He had super high clearance, and as part of his job for the task force, the UAP task force, he interviewed all these people and saw documentations. And Drew, he has just said that yes, the United States has possession of unidentified aerial phenomena craft. What do you think?
I go back to, like, what reason would he have to make that up? Like, he talks about 40 people that he's interviewed that like, I know that people will attack him and say, well, he never saw it. He himself never saw it. And yes, that's true. But his job was to run, like, wasn't he like the head of basically this task force, or he was very high up, to your point.
Right.
Like, he had access to things. And he's coming forth as a whistleblower. He's putting his own reputation on the line. Like, I know everyone wants to say, well, show me the proof. And I get that. But he's offered to have the conversations and tell the people that he talked to, like, here's what I saw, here's what and he wants to do it in secure facilities, which I mean, makes sense. Then there's the other side of it where they'll say, he truly believes what he's saying, but he's been fed bad information.
Right.
But, like, again, why would, unless it's some smoke screen or something, I don't understand why that would happen. And I'm not the smartest guy on the government politics and all that kind of stuff, so there may be very valid reasons, but it just doesn't seem like there would be a valid reason to me for this guy to lie. Like, I just don't understand.
Yeah. Well, Drew, you bring up a really good point. It's that he hasn't had access. He tried to get access after he learned about these things. He tried to get access into these programs to see what was going on, but he was denied access. So everything that he's presenting is from researching people. He says that he has seen the official documents from the programs and possibly visual documents like pictures and that type of thing. And he's talked to the people who are on the programs. And so you're right. It's like this. I think people want to say this is hearsay. However, I don't think that's quite right in terms of if he has truly seen the actual documents from the program, if he's seen actual photographs from the program, I think, any journalist or historian would call those primary documents, if they're legit. So I don't think, reporting or giving testimony based on primary documents is hearsay necessarily. It's not like he, heard some guy talking, or someone just said, hey, you got to trust me, bro.
Yeah.
Like this is what's going on. Like, if he's actually seen those documents, I think that puts it up a bit. But you bring up a really interesting point. These could be fabricated. This could be a ruse potentially. You would think that he would do his due diligence and make sure that, all these people aren't somehow coordinating this information to present to him in a way to give him a false impression of what might be going on, because it seems to be very incriminating, the idea that the government is basically taking funding from Congress and diverting it into black programs that have no oversight, and they're doing what they want, and also giving these materials and money to contractors, outside of the government. So, and that's one of the things he basically accused the government of doing, is passing off this hardware, supposedly non-human hardware, to private contractors so it could escape oversight from the government.
I think you made a lot of good points there. The one that stands out to me too is, like, he's obviously putting his own reputation on the line. So you would think that somebody would be relatively confident before they go and like, nobody wants to be embarrassed, right? That's human, right? As a human, you don't want to be embarrassed. And, think about just, regular job. If you go and escalate something to some high up VP or some senior person in a company, for example, and you're not telling the truth, or you did it based on what somebody told you, you're going to be in trouble, right? Like, I mean, that's just how the world works. So if you think about that, that's kind of what he's doing here. Like, he has to share information with people He's putting his own reputation on the line. He's sticking his neck out there. He really does believe what he's saying. Like, I don't see a scenario. And again, he could have been fed bad information, but I think to the best of his ability, I'm sure he's vetted it. And I'm sure he truly feels, because I mean, think about this. Like, he's all in front of the world, like the entire world. It's not just like, oh, he went on some local cable channel. Like, this guy's all over the internet, all over the world. Like, the world is connected. People know his name. So I don't think you would just put yourself out there to say, yeah, maybe, I feel like pretty with a reasonable certainty this is real. No, I mean, like, I just don't see a scenario where he didn't vet that stuff. And you nailed it when you said that, because, I don't know. And I think the piece about diverting funding is the most fascinating thing about it as well, because maybe that's the only way they can get this stuff looked at. And when they say they, like, who are they? Then you start going down a whole rabbit hole of like, what's the motivation there? And we've all watched movies and read books and, played video games where all of this stuff happens, the secret cabal of people like that. That's fascinating by itself as well. So Grusch is a really interesting person. And what he said, like, of all the testimony, man, it's like you said, you call it hearsay, but I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
Right. And based on what we know, right? Like, we haven't seen these documents he's talked about. It could be that he's inflating what he's got, and but that's the thing. It seems like such a short distance to be able to tell if it's true or not. Like, people would just need to look at what he's got and the information he has, and be able to do that if they're willing to pursue it. Which I don't know why you wouldn't want to pursue it. I'll bring up one more video from him that's perhaps the spiciest video, or it's gotten the most press.
I believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier. Do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. Non-human biologics, Drew. What do you think?
It's a very strong thing to throw out there if it's not true. Like, what and non-human, what does that even mean, right? And the word biologics is also fascinating too, because like, I instantly go to Independence Day or something like that, where you think about Dr. Oken, Brent Spiner, and all that stuff. And I think a lot about, when I think about that movie in particular, when they were in Area 51 and they had the bodies in the tubes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course, and I know some folks had mentioned Roswell earlier when we were talking. I think that was also famous, where they said they recovered some type of body, an alien body, and there was, I remember, I forgot what show it was the alien autopsy, where it was a hoax and all that stuff. But like, it doesn't also mean, and I read this before, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were like human biologic or non-human biologics, like, oh, it's an alien that's alive. Like, some people have speculated they use those bodies as like drones themselves, where they're like almost avataring in, like the movie Avatar, which is fascinating too. Maybe that's how they deal with the tic-tac mechanics and physics. But
yeah,
I mean, it is the most, like you said, spicy. That's the right word, because like, your mind just goes all over the place. It's like, what is that? What could it be? And what does that mean for the universe?
Right. And let me bring this up. Okay, biologic. I figured we need to look this up, because this isn't a word that it's kind of an interesting word choice, because he could have said biological specimens. He could have like been more clear. Biologics seems to be about the vaguest term you could use for this. And it's another term for biological. These natural biologics can be as potent as manufactured drugs. So what's an example of a biologic? Hormones, blood products, I don't know that word, growth factors, vaccines, gene and cellular therapies, fusion proteins, insulin. So we're talking not necessarily like a complete animal. We're talking about even just like small biological like molecules or cells or, so this is vague, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you think about if these crafts have crashed, think about a plane crash with a human in it. I mean, it could have just, I hate to get gruesome here, but you could just have body parts left or teeth or something like, right? Like I think in certain accidents, they identify people by, dental records and stuff when it's extreme. Like maybe they have stuff like that, but when he says non-human, that's what really gets you because let's say it is blood or something or some form of body fluid. Like they know that it's not of human origin when he's saying non-human. So what that means is very fascinating. Like what could that be?
Right. I know. And I like your avatar kind of, it could be something like that too. Or I think this kind of, if people want to say that it's just mechanical, like it's an AI, it's some sort of computer, this seems to indicate that there's something alive with these. If what he's saying is true, or if what he's seen is accurate, there's something living that's have to do with these things.
Yeah. Well, I think about Terminator, right? Like the human flesh on the outside of like a mechanical skeleton or something like that. I don't know what it could be. I actually I have to give credit. I think it was on Reddit or something, and I was reading about some of this, and the avatar thing was really something I had never thought about before. And I thought that was like made a lot of sense because they could grow. Like I mean, I know I'm going way out here now, but let's assume that it was
okay, Drew. That's what we do here.
It's very after dark, so we're allowed. But let's say that there is some type of non-human craft, non-human biologics. What better way to explore a world in a physical body than to just create something, maybe 3D print? Because we can 3D print organs now. Like I know they can do that, right? They grow cells, and this is human stuff, so they can 3D print, a kidney or whatever. Or that's at least what they're researching. I mean, it's not to say that that couldn't be done. I mean, those things can be cultured and then grown. And then let's say they could put consciousness in and then jump out of it. I mean, I know I'm way out there, but that type of thing fascinates me. And I love science fiction. So even if it's not real, like that stuff is very intriguing as a possibility.
I know. And that's what's so confounding about this. It's vague enough that it just sets our imaginations going like crazy. At least it does for me.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to know, like, what is this? Like, I want the information. I want to see what this guy's seen. What's happening, because something's going on. Like, I think as we, Grusch is coming from a different angle than the pilots. The pilots, I think, are saying, the nuts and bolts, this is what we saw. This is the behavior we observed. Grusch is like reporting on inside information coming from deep inside these black projects. So it's like a different source of information, but my goodness, like trying to put this together is just absolutely fascinating.
I know Terry said earlier, like, what if they don't want us just freaking out? Like I was thinking about this, right? Where I think about the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones, right? Like just having that information, could our brains handle it? And I'm not saying that they couldn't, but imagine if you knew that there was, I don't know, a bunch of different extraterrestrial species, and at any point they could just wipe us off the face of the planet. Could I live with that existential dread? Like would I be able to function on a daily basis? I don't know. Like I want to know, but then I'm thinking like maybe I don't want to know. Like, it's a really fascinating question because knowing and having sort of like the secrets of the universe, like, is that enough for our human minds to be able to handle? Maybe we can't comprehend it.
You bring up a fascinating point, Drew, and that's that you and I and the rest of the human race assume that we're capable of understanding everything about the universe, given enough time, given enough research, using science. we assume that everything could be understandable, with time. But what if that's just not the case? What if there's a point at which we can't solve it, we can't digest it, we can't comprehend it? It's beyond our biology somehow.
Yeah.
I know that that's maybe not popular, and we shouldn't assume that necessarily, but
Right.
we might hit a wall at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think about just the evolution of human beings, right? Like there's Neanderthals and just animals, right? So animals all have, like they talk a lot about, I'll use, dolphins as an example. It's a really good example, right? They have advanced communication within the dolphin community, right? Like within dolphins.
Right.
But we can't understand what the heck they're talking about, but they clearly have, and these are just beings on Earth, right? This is within our own understanding, and we still don't even understand how they communicate. We don't understand, I know that there's a thing now with orcas, like basically ramming into ships. Why is that happening? Like we have to study it. We can't understand, and they're communicating with each other. And I think a lot about that, and just things beyond our own comprehension on Earth. Like think about just the trenches in the ocean and what's down there and how much science has advanced. Like I think people say this, and you told me this before, but I think the ocean, I mean, the ocean is on our own planet, and we've only explored, a minuscule percentage of it. Like what else is in our own oceans that we don't even understand? And I'm not even saying extraterrestrials. I mean, I'm talking about like animals and creatures. Like if you showed somebody a giant squid in the Viking time, they would think it was an alien, And we only recently have seen these things when you start thinking about the evolution of society and what we've been able to understand. And our technology itself has been advancing, in an exponential way. Think about, we talked about the nuclear weapons and stuff. I mean, it was good and bad, right? It was terrible in itself as well. But I mean, that unlocked like laws of physics and nature that nobody knew were even possible. You go back to like Galileo's time, right? People thought the universe or the solar system revolved around the Earth. Not that long ago, when you think about it, in the grand scheme of years. So what we could comprehend then, I mean, imagine if you took an iPhone back to like caveman times. Like they would look at you like you were a god. And it's something like that. Now imagine a sphere inside of a cube inside of a sphere. Maybe that's just like an iPhone from the year 10,000. Like, but it's like it's all relative, the technology. It's a fascinating thing. So
That's a wonderful point. And Terry says, "Yay, you mentioned me, Drew." And yes, we may not be able to comprehend what's out there, and even those who have seen it don't comprehend it either. Right? I mean,
agree.
Everyone's confused. Peter Vonasak says, "This is wild."
It is.
I agree, Peter. It really, really is.
It is.
Marianella says, "The ships that crashed in Roswell." Yes. Okay. So if you go watch the News Nation interview, and maybe I'll put that in the descriptions, a link to it if it's out there. I think it is. David Grusch does talk about Roswell, and that was a case of a crashed UAP that was recovered by the government. That was not even the first one. I guess supposedly one happened in Italy back in the 30s, but the crash in Roswell was one that was legit. And the other thing, Drew, here is that, some people have mentioned that, and you obviously read science fiction and you're into all of this stuff. What David Grusch is saying does seem like a greatest hits compilation of all science fiction speculation. It's like, oh, everything we suspected is true. And like some people have like said, well, doesn't that kind of seem weird? Like that everything, it's like, from the crashed craft to the aliens and the government cover-ups, and Roswell's true and everything's true. And is it too good to be true?
It certainly could be, but I feel like maybe those things are in popular culture and whatever for a reason, because they happened, and maybe they didn't. I think that's it's important to ground, right? Because I think you started this conversation by saying it right. Like, we don't know what's going on. We're not saying it's aliens. Like, we don't know.
Right.
It could be
We don't know.
military advancements. It could be, I mean, it could be adversary. It could be anything, right? We don't know. So I think aliens is probably the most fun thing to speculate on, and because it's sort of like when you have no explanation, it's kind of easy to go there. But something that I'll say, and I'll out myself on this, but and you know this about me because we've talked about this before, but I loved watching the show Ancient Aliens. Like, it's a guilty
Right.
pleasure of mine. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. And I know that the science is not necessarily there on that, and I know that they romanticize and sort of maybe exaggerate certain things. But something that I've always personally found fascinating, and you mentioned this, it's a greatest hits compilation. When you see imagery from like ancient civilizations, and when you see some of the similarities and things, or you think about like religions and things, and everything comes from the sky, and maybe as humans, it's hard not to look up at the stars and sort of just feel in awe of that. But when you see certain imagery like of looks like almost like beings, right? And again, our imaginations can go that way, but it's something that always intrigued me. Like, how did these cultures all across the world that, for what we know, didn't have the technology to see each other, at least they're aware of, uh, have the same types of thoughts on a lot of things and the same, I don't know. It's certainly possible that they could have come up with that stuff, but it just seems like a really interesting connection. And I think a lot about that when you mentioned the greatest hits. It's like, but these things have been happening for, a very long time into very ancient human culture, it seems, with some of those
Right.
images and things.
Right. And that, I mean, that's a great idea. If something's going on, whether it's from this planet or not,
Yeah.
something strange might have been going on for a very long time.
Yeah.
And that's something the Lieutenant Graves said, is like they didn't even know about these objects until they upgraded their sensors in 2015. Then all of a sudden they saw all these things and they're like, there's got to be something wrong with our
Yeah.
equipment. But then they're like, nope, that's been there, And so, yeah, it's like we're just sensing these things for the first time.
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I was going to say another thing that always fascinates me about that as well is just look at the advancement of technology. Like, maybe the counterpoint to that is, why couldn't they have had advanced technology back then? Like, we weren't around, so we didn't know. And you think about the way that the world sort of changed over, like you look at the dark ages and medieval, like it's almost like things went backwards. So was there a point in the world and the earth where things were really that advanced and somehow some catastrophic things set them back or whatever? I know we have archaeologists that look for things and we can see literal proof within the soil of the earth and whatnot. But is there a possibility that some of that stuff almost reset and we didn't really know about it, and now we're sort of advancing our own technology on a different path? And maybe it was humans all along. Maybe there's offshoots of that or something. It's just another fascinating thing to think about.
I love that you brought that up, Drew. I love that you brought it up because, I remember taking in college a history of science course. And, it pretty much goes along where, okay, this is how long humans have been around, our current version of humans for at least a couple 100,000 years. And then just about, 5,000 years ago, we started to write things down. And then after that, we started to get better at things. And then science as we know it just popped up in the last few hundred years. And just looking at that, you look at that and you go, wait a second. So our species in its current form has been around for the last couple 100,000 years. And it's only in the past 5,000 years that we figured out how to write things down. And that could be true. And I'm not saying that's what all the evidence seems to suggest. And I will always go with the evidence. However, it does bring up this interesting idea that, wait, were there different societies in our ancient history that we have no clue about, that are long since buried, that maybe suffered some kind of cataclysm? And I know that there's like some controversial ideas about this kind of stuff, like Graham Hancock. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but
Sure.
I think what you're suggesting, Drew, is just the idea that there could have been some kind of ancient society that ended for whatever reason, or maybe split off and maybe is living in a different place now that we're not aware of. But like, it's a fascinating idea to think about that. Yeah, what were we doing for those couple 100,000 years, Drew? It's very odd to me that we wouldn't have progressed further than that.
Well, even think about like just something. I know Atlantis is more speculative because there's no proof that it existed, but just look at like Roman society or ancient Greece. Like the ideas and the thoughts that they had at that time were I mean, they had very civilized society for the most part, right? There was elections, there was, all kinds of stuff. And I mean, look, they had gladiators and stuff too, but when you start thinking about that, it's like then we went back to medieval time. Like, it's just a weird thing to think about how advanced they were in thought and advanced they were in military tactics and things like that. And look, there wasn't F-18s back then or anything like that. They weren't necessarily flying, but I think about whether Atlantis is real or not, like the story of it. And you mentioned earlier, like humans love stories. It's a great story, isn't it? But is it that far-fetched to think that people had advanced technology? They figured some of these things out. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what is real and what isn't, but it's fun to think about sometimes.
Well, you look at the Romans and you look at what they accomplished, and it is stunning. That was 2,000 years ago, and they were just engineering masters. It's like they had plumbing, they had like all of these things. And it seems like maybe the one thing that escaped them was the discovery of electricity.
Yeah.
And they were engineers, but maybe they didn't delve into the sciences, and the philosophy as much as, say, the Greeks did. And so maybe if they were just like nuts and bolts kind of society, if they maybe looked into the science more and maybe made some more discoveries, we could have been there a long time ago. Okay, they just happened to not do that. But you wonder, did a society back in Atlantean times or something like that, did they figure it out? Did they discover electricity? Because it's around us. Ben Franklin did a lot of work with it, but I mean, we've had lightning as long as Earth's been around. Was there a society that discovered electricity and allowed them to do things with it?
I think it's so fascinating to think about that. And I forgot the device that we were talking about, but I mentioned, and I think you mentioned it was something in maybe the new Indiana Jones movie, but that there was that weird device that they found that was off the coast of, I think, one of the Greek islands or something. I forgot the name. You told me the other day, but
the Antikythera or something like that.
Yeah. And like something like that was really fascinating because it's like, how did they have those precise measurements? And I know, again, I don't mean to say Ancient Aliens is like the greatest scientific source there, but when they do some of the things that they brought up that fascinated me was like, oh, how could they do, measurements of this precision? How could they do that? What's to say that they couldn't without extraterrestrial help? Like, I'm not saying that aliens had to do it, but the engineering at those times was very advanced. And it's certainly humans could have done that stuff. And I think I saw on one of the podcasts more recently, they had talked about the pyramids and stuff had been there well before the Egyptians that we even knew as we think about them in history. What if that was there even before them and it from a more advanced civilization or something? Like, who knows? It's very interesting. It's very interesting to think about.
Yeah. And there's so much history that's probably just buried right now. And, it'd be impossible for us to go like basically dig up the entire planet, to try and find all this stuff. Imagine how much history is out there and we have yet to discover it and it's completely buried. And I bet there are some very shocking things that we haven't seen yet. Of course, we're not suggesting any of this is like fact. We believe in evidence and we're not saying that it happened, but we're saying that it's good to proceed with an open mind. Like, what are the possibilities?
Yeah. I think that's the best way to put it. Because I don't want to say to anybody, oh, I know for a fact, the ancient Sumerians were contacted by, like, who knows? Like, what's to say they just didn't know how to do this stuff? And we as humans give ourselves more credit than we don't need some alien species to teach us stuff. And maybe there are people that just know how to do this stuff. I don't know. It's fascinating to think about, though.
Yeah, it is. We have a comment from Valiant Thor. I like your avatar. Based on our current congressional hearings, the only thing left is for the ETs to reveal themselves. Then every single piece of toilet paper on the planet will be gone. Right, because we've learned that that's what people run for when they're when they're in fear, right? They go for the toilet paper.
I don't miss that time. I'll say that.
No. Well, I will say that there is this researcher named Robin Hanson, and he was on the Lex Friedman show. It's fascinating if you listen to it. And he makes this fascinating hypothesis as to why, if they are aliens, they won't reveal themselves directly to us. And he has this entire hypothesis circulating around this concept of grabby aliens. And it is fascinating, and it is so well thought of. It starts with like this idea of something called a panspermia hypothesis, the idea that it is possible that, we talked about all the different types of creatures and life that could be in the universe. Well, our sun is, our local stars form in a nursery together, right? Like in a kind of a solar nursery, where all these different stars kind of form in the same group. So they would expect to be made of the same materials, and you could have basically interaction and materials from these different things. Basically, the idea is that life could be seeded on multiple planets and multiple solar systems from stars that formed in the same region. So that's a hypothesis, is that the stars around us and closest to us may be related to us, and there could have been cross seeding, and that's why life may have evolved in very similar ways.
That's really interesting. If you could
Yeah.
send that, I would love to watch that.
I'll put a link to that podcast in the description. I will send it to you as well, Drew.
That's
But
awesome.
like, he was basically, and he's coming from a researcher of like a risk assessment perspective. So he's like an analyst, and he comes up with like these different things. And he basically says that actually there's a fairly decent chance that there are alien civilizations, and he calculates it out. And he basically talks about multiple types of civilizations, that you have grabby aliens that are very invasive. And what they would do is they would go out and harm other societies, and you have like non-grabby aliens. Sorry, Robin Hanson, if you're watching, if I'm completely butchering your hypothesis, but the idea is that you can have very invasive expansionist societies, and then you have those that aren't. And the thing is, the expansionist societies pose the most threat to all the other societies in the galaxy, because they would want conquest. Probably like us, we would like to go and get fun things and nice minerals and expensive things. But these aliens that we see are non-grabby, and the galaxy needs to keep it that way because expansionist societies are bad. So essentially what's going on is they're here, and they're constantly staying at the edge of our perception. And they want us to know that they're there, that they're superior to us, as basically kind of like an idea of like, who's the top dog, like how dogs relate to each other,
Marking
and
your territory.
marking your territory, and keeping everyone in line so that there's a clear understanding of who's in charge, so you don't try anything. And so that's basically what's happening now. And that will also be why these things will always be somewhat imperceptible, because they're trying to communicate with us, hey, we're the top dog, don't try anything, don't mess with us. And the other thing is that, yes, if they decide that we are grabby and we're not going to abide, then I guess statistically, he said that they would have to completely destroy us. But it's fascinating, but it's a published paper, and it's like I'll put that in the description and listen to it, because it's fascinating to listen to.
Man, did you? And I don't know if you. I know it got a lot of flack, but the movie Prometheus, like the concept of that is really was really fascinating to me, and like I know it didn't get good reviews and stuff like that. So from a critique standpoint, like it wasn't what people wanted. But I find that concept very interesting. Like the fact that maybe life was seeded by, either another species or whatever. And, okay, like it's just it's a very interesting concept. And I think what you said there, I can't wait to watch that because it makes a lot of sense. Like if that's the way that it would work, because it
Right.
seems like something we would do, right? Like we set up military bases on people's borders and things. It's like, don't
Right.
cross this line here. We're not going to bug you, but just don't cross this line. You put your presence. Animals do it. Like you said, dogs. It's a very, I mean, again, maybe it's a human way of looking at it to try to make sense of it. But I really like, man, that's so cool. I can't wait to watch that. I like Lex Friedman's show too. I think he has some great guests and of all over the place, and it's really cool. But I would love to check that out. Sounds super fascinating.
Absolutely, guys. I will put that in the description. If you're into this stuff, it's a heady listen, but it's great. I'm going to play one more video, Drew, before we close this out, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
This is from the hearing, and I think it kind of puts it in perspective from maybe a threat to us and our society. We'll see what you think.
For each of you, yes or no question. Based off of your own experience or the data that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs could be essentially collecting reconnaissance information? Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Grusch?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Mr. Fravor?
Very possible.
Again, in the national security vein, is it possible that these UAPs would be probing our capabilities? Yes or no, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Grusch?
Yes.
Fravor?
Definitely.
Is it possible that these UAPs are testing for vulnerabilities in our current systems?
Yes.
Yes.
Possible.
Do you feel, based off of your experience and the information that you've been privy to, that these UAPs provide an existential threat to the national security of the United States? Mr. Graves?
Potentially.
Yes, sir, potentially.
Same answer, potentially.
Yeah, I'd say
Fravor?
definitely, potentially.
Mr. Graves and Fravor, in the event that your encounters had become hostile, would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Sir?
No.
Is based off of the information that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs are interested in our nuclear technology and capabilities?
Yes.
By external observation, sure, that could be a fair assessment, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I thought that was one of the most powerful moments of the hearing because of their positions. I mean, and it kind of puts what we were talking about in stark view, I think, is that there are things out there that are around us. By everything that I would use to just judge a situation and take people's credibility into account without having seen it myself, it seems like something's there, something's going on. It's trying to collect information. Looks like definitely about our nuclear capabilities. It's kind of stunning. Like, I don't know, should we be freaked out about this?
It comes back to like what I was thinking about earlier when we were talking about what would you do if you knew what was happening? Would it
Right.
make you so full of dread that you just wouldn't know what to do? Like maybe I would have some type of psychological breakdown if I because it's hard to comprehend, but I don't understand, human or non-human, whatever it is, right? Like we said it before, something was happening. I mean, there's video evidence of it. Whatever it is, who knows? But it makes a lot of sense to say that it was some type of surveillance or some type of understanding what our capabilities are, or maybe it's like you said, just sort of showing themselves like, hey, we're here,
Right.
whoever we are. But I think the fact that they all kind of said without any hesitation, like, yes, possible. Like there was no hesitation in their voice. Like and those questions, the congressperson that was asking, I think were good questions, and they asked these things on purpose. It makes you think like, hey, we should probably try to get a little bit more information here, pay attention to this. And maybe the powers that be already know all the answers and they're just not going to tell anybody, But I think it certainly does put it into perspective, to your point. and it makes you kind of feel like, holy crap, maybe something's going on here.
Right. You know, if there's something that could pose a threat, an existential threat to our country, and it's something that beyond what we understand, something that we would want the absolute smartest scientists in the world working on. I don't know why they would keep it so classified.
Right.
That's the one thing that really, I don't know. My question is, it's like, I understand if this is a military threat, if it's something that we kind of have our hands around, maybe we have secret projects that kind of understand what's going on. That's one thing. But if it's truly something beyond our understanding and could pose a threat to us, you would think that they would want to enlist all of the top scientists in the world to try and figure this out.
Yeah, I think about that a lot too, because I think about books and movies and TV shows and stuff where, let's say there's some, obviously in science fiction, there's some full scale invasion, war of the worlds type thing, right? Does humanity come together and say, hey, let's tackle this together? Or I think humans, fortunately or unfortunately, right, as beings are always looking for the top angle over one another. It's just how society has worked for hundreds of years.
Right.
And or thousands of years, really. And you think about it, I mean, maybe they would try to get an edge on each other. And maybe there's this competitive thing behind the scenes of like, they don't want to acknowledge it because, like you said earlier, they're trying to be the first to reverse engineer it and get the edge on someone else. Or maybe there is some sort of Men in Black scenario where there's this international understanding of, hey, you know, we got to figure this thing out and get the bat phone. So I tend to think about that a lot. Like, would humanity come together? I don't know. I don't know.
Gosh, Drew, I think we've just stepped very gently into this world tonight, and we've had, I think, an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate your insights on all this because it helps ground my perspective. And I want to thank everyone in the comments. I want to see Don. Thanks for showing up, Don. It's great to see you. And Marianella, I have not seen the movie Paul. Have you seen the movie Paul?
I know the movie, but I haven't watched it. I know exactly what you're talking about, Marianella. If it's worth watching, tell me, because I haven't seen it, but it's always been one that I thought about adding to the list.
Right. Absolutely. And everyone, thank you for watching. If you're watching live, thanks for participating in the live chat. If you're watching on the replay or listening to the podcast, thank you for joining us. Leave a comment or a review. Let us know what you think. If you have any thoughts or even experiences, go ahead and let us know. If you enjoy this conversation and would like more of it, because there's quite a lot to talk about, let us know as well. We're trying out all different types of topics now that the strikes are still happening. And so we're trying to act in solidarity with those strikes. So that's why we're not talking about some of our favorite shows and movies like we love doing. But Drew, this has been an honor. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, same. Thank you for having me. And thanks to all the great comments. This is a world that I admittedly don't know a ton about, but I am fascinated by it. And it's really cool to be able to dip our toes in the water, like you said. I think that's a perfect way to put it. There's a whole ocean of this to get into. People like it.
Yes, definitely. Oh my gosh, Drew, I've even got more ideas now. But Drew, I want to wish you a very happy after dark and night. And everyone else too. I wish you a very, very happy evening. And we look forward to seeing you again soon on KenCast. We'll see you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next time on KenCast.